Leave the plaza, now.
Public space, on what legal grounds?
We got a call. You don't belong here. You're making people nervous.
Nervous isn't a crime. What law am I violating?
The patrol car idled at the curb engine, humming low red and blue lights washing over the concrete wall behind them. The man in the dark navy suit stood still, hands visible at his sides, the early afternoon sun reflecting off his polished shoes. Officer Palmer pointed toward the exit of the plaza and spoke slowly, each word heavy with assumption. "You need to leave this area right now." The man tilted his head slightly, not in defiance, but in disbelief. "On what grounds, officer? This is a public space." Palmer stepped closer. His radio crackled. The smell of hot asphalt mixed with exhaust fumes hung in the air. "We received a call. You don't belong here and you're making people nervous." Cars rolled past on the street. A delivery truck hissed as it braked. A woman sitting on a bench paused mid-scroll on her phone. The man adjusted his jacket, calm controlled. "I'm here for work. If there's a concern, I'd like to know the legal basis for your order." Palmer's jaw tightened. He glanced around. A few people had slowed their steps. "I said leave, now, or I'll escort you out." The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't step back either. "Officer, ordering someone to leave a public area requires cause. What law am I violating?" For a moment there was silence except for the ticking engine and distant sirens somewhere across town. Palmer's hand hovered near his belt. His confidence wavered, then hardened. "You're refusing a lawful order. That's your problem." A teenager across the street lifted his phone camera, pointed openly now. Another bystander whispered something to her friend. The man's eyes flicked briefly toward the phones, then back to Palmer. "I'm asking a simple question. If I've done something wrong, tell me what it is." Palmer exhaled sharply. His voice dropped. "You people always do this. Always think you're above instructions." He gestured again, sharper this time. "Last warning." The words landed like a slap. The man's expression changed not to anger, but to something heavier. Disappointment. He reached slowly into his inner pocket, announcing every movement. "I'm going to show you my identification." Palmer stiffened. "Don't reach." The tension snapped tight. The crowd was no longer pretending not to watch. The man stopped his hand, mid-motion, fingers still. "Officer, I'm complying. I want this documented correctly." The radio crackled again. Palmer didn't notice. He was locked into the moment, into the assumption he had already made the second he arrived and saw who was standing there. He nodded once, curt. "Show it." Quickly. The man withdrew a leather credential holder, but did not open it yet. He looked Palmer directly in the eye. "Before you say anything else, I want you to understand something. The order you just gave may have consequences." Palmer scoffed. "You threatening me now?" "No," the man said quietly. "I'm warning you." The plaza felt smaller, air heavier, as if everyone sensed something irreversible was about to happen. One wrong step. One sentence too far. The confrontation froze in place, but the story did not begin there. To understand how a simple order became a public reckoning, you have to step backward years before the patrol car, before the raised voice, before the assumption was ever spoken out loud. The man standing in the plaza that afternoon was Daniel Brooks, 52 years old, State Public Safety Director, the highest-ranking civilian authority overseeing emergency response, disaster coordination, and interagency security across the entire state. On paper, his title carried weight. In real life, it carried scars. Daniel grew up in a narrow brick apartment building on the south side of Cleveland. His mother worked double shifts as a hospital janitor. His father drove a city bus until his heart gave out when Daniel was 15. Sirens were the soundtrack of his childhood. Police lights flashed outside his window more nights than he could count. He learned early what authority looked like when it was pointed at you instead of standing beside you. At 18, Daniel enlisted. Not because it was easy, but because it was structured. The military gave him rules that applied to everyone, at least on paper. He served 2 tours overseas in logistics and emergency operations. He was the one coordinating evacuations when things went wrong. The one counting bodies when plans failed. Calm under pressure became his reputation. He earned medals quietly without ceremony and went home without fanfare. After his service, he studied public administration at night while working days in emergency management. Hurricanes, wildfires, bridge collapses, train derailments. Daniel was always there, often unseen, making sure ambulances arrived, shelters opened, and systems kept breathing when chaos tried to shut them down. He missed birthdays, funerals, holidays. His marriage did not survive the hours. His work did. By 45, he was appointed deputy director. By 49, governor backed his promotion unanimously. Daniel Brooks became the man every police chief, fire commissioner, and emergency director reported to during a crisis. When systems failed, he was the one called at 3 in the morning. When lives were saved, someone else stood at the podium. Despite the title, Daniel never dressed for attention. He wore muted suits. No flashy watch. No security detail unless protocol demanded it. He believed authority should move quietly. That belief came from years of watching loud power make mistakes. Officer Mark Palmer came from a different story. 34 years old, 9 years on the force, born and raised 2 towns over. His father had been a corrections officer. His uncle, a cop. Policing was framed as legacy, not responsibility. Palmer entered the academy with average scores and a reputation for confidence. Too much confidence, according to some instructors. His personnel file told a story that never reached the public. 3 complaints in 6 years. 2 for aggressive tone. 1 for an unlawful stop that was closed without discipline due to insufficient evidence. Each time, supervisors noted potential issues with judgment under stress. Each time, Palmer completed retraining and returned to patrol. He gravitated toward enforcement over de-escalation. Control mattered to him. Being questioned felt like disrespect. And somewhere along the way, pattern replaced evidence. Certain faces triggered quicker suspicion. Certain neighborhoods made his hand rest closer to his belt. The afternoon of the incident, Palmer had been dispatched on a vague call. Suspicious individual lingering near restricted facilities. No description of behavior. No report of a crime. Just a presence that made someone uncomfortable. Palmer arrived already expecting a problem. When he saw Daniel Brooks standing there, suit pressed, posture calm, he did not see a director. He saw a challenge. A man who looked out of place in his mental map of authority. The assumption formed instantly without conscious thought. That assumption guided every word that followed. Palmer did not check credentials first. He did not ask neutral questions. He asserted. He ordered. And when Daniel responded with calm resistance grounded in law, Palmer felt exposed. To him, compliance was respect. Questions were defiance. That is how their histories collided in a matter of minutes. One man shaped by decades of service restraint and invisible labor. The other shaped by a system that had corrected him just enough to continue, but never enough to change. The plaza did not know any of this. The bystanders did not know. But all of it was present in the space between them, in the tone of voice, in the pause before each sentence. And that was before the truth came out. Daniel Brooks kept the credential holder steady in his hand, unopened. The leather was worn at the edges not from show, but from years of use. Officer Palmer stared at it like it was a trick. The plaza had gone quiet in the way public spaces do when something is wrong, but no one has named it yet. Before I open this, Daniel said, his voice even, I need you to slow this down. You are escalating a situation without cause. Palmer laughed once, short and sharp. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. Open it. Now. Daniel opened the holder just enough to reveal the seal. Not thrust forward. Not hidden. Presented. State of Ohio. Department of Public Safety. His name. His photograph. His title. Palmer glanced at it for less than a second. That doesn't mean anything, Palmer said, already shaking his head. Anyone can fake a badge. You think I haven't seen that before? A man standing near the coffee cart spoke under his breath. That looks real. His friend nudged him hard. Don't get involved. Daniel closed the holder calmly and slipped it back into his jacket. Officer, dismissing official credentials without verification is a serious mistake. If you have doubts, call it in. Verify. That is the procedure. Palmer felt the eyes now. Phones were fully raised. The teenager across the street had crossed halfway into the road for a better angle. Palmer's radio crackled again, dispatch asking for a status update. He ignored it. You're not in charge here, Palmer said. His voice rose. I am, and I'm telling you to leave. Daniel took a breath. This time it was audible. I am not leaving. I am here on official business related to emergency preparedness. You do not have the authority to remove me without lawful cause. That word hit Palmer wrong. Authority. It sounded like a challenge. like a crowd watching to see who blinked first. Palmer stepped closer, invading the space deliberately. You want to make this hard, that's your choice. But don't act surprised when it goes another way. A woman near the bench spoke up, voice shaking. He hasn't done anything. Palmer turned on her instantly. Ma'am, step back. This doesn't concern you. She did step back, but she kept recording. Her hand trembled. The man by the coffee cart started narrating quietly, almost unconsciously. Timestamp. Officer name visible. No aggression from subject. Daniel noticed. He met the man's eyes briefly and nodded. Then he turned back to Palmer. Officer, this is your last opportunity to de-escalate. Call your supervisor. Verify my credentials. We can end this without consequences. Palmer heard only one thing. Threat. He straightened his shoulders, squared his stance. You don't give me ultimatums. He reached for his cuffs, not fully drawing them, but enough for the metal to glint in the sunlight. A collective inhale rippled through the crowd. Daniel did not move. He did not raise his hands yet. He simply said quietly enough that only Palmer heard him. You are about to cross a line that will follow you for the rest of your life. Palmer's jaw clenched. His pride, his fear, his assumptions all collapsed into one decision. Turn around, Palmer said, hands behind your back. The plaza erupted. Someone shouted. Someone cursed. Multiple phones zoomed in at once. Daniel looked past Palmer at the people watching the evidence forming in real time. I am not resisting, Daniel said clearly. That sentence was for the record. Palmer grabbed his arm, and in that instant, the situation went from questionable to indefensible. Palmer's grip tightened around Daniel's arm. Not enough to cause pain yet, but enough to assert control. The metal of the handcuffs scraped softly as he pulled them free, that distinct sound sharp and final. The plaza seemed to slow, every movement stretching longer than it should have. Daniel turned slowly, exactly as instructed. His jacket shifted. The breeze caught the edge of his tie. He placed his hands behind his back with deliberate care. I am complying, he said again, louder this time. I am not resisting. The cuffs closed around his wrists. Click. Then tighter. Click. Cold metal pressed into skin. A woman gasped. Someone swore out loud. The teenager's phone shook as he zoomed in. The sound of the cuffs echoed far louder than it should have in an open space. Palmer pulled Daniel a half step forward. Too fast. Daniel stumbled, caught himself. His face remained composed, but his jaw set hard. He stared straight ahead, eyes focused on nothing. He had stood in command centers during natural disasters. He had watched buildings burn on live feeds. This somehow felt heavier. Palmer guided him toward the patrol car. Each step felt ceremonial, like a performance staged for the crowd. The crunch of gravel under shoes, the hum of traffic, the distant wail of a siren that had nothing to do with them. You didn't have to do this, Daniel said quietly as they walked. There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. Palmer didn't answer. His face was flushed now. He opened the rear door and gestured sharply. Get in. Daniel lowered himself into the back seat. The plastic bench was hard. The air inside smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. Palmer closed the door with more force than necessary. The sound rang out, sealing the moment. For a second, Palmer stood there, breathing hard. He glanced at the phones pointed at him. At the woman who had stepped closer, her lips pressed tight. At the man narrating under his breath, still recording. Palmer turned away and got into the driver's seat. The engine started. The car pulled away. Inside the moving patrol car, Daniel sat upright, hands cuffed behind him. The city slid past the window in fragments. Storefronts, crosswalks, faces turning. His mind shifted gears, calm and precise. Time of arrest. Lack of probable cause. Failure to verify credentials. Witnesses. Video evidence. In the front seat, Palmer gripped the steering wheel too tightly. His thoughts raced now, no longer orderly. A flicker of doubt surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. The credential holder. The seal. The warning. He pushed it down. Dispatch crackled through the radio. Unit 17 status update. Palmer hesitated half a second too long. Subject detained. En route. Back seat. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. This was no longer about him alone. He knew that. This was about every quiet decision that had led to this car moving down this street, carrying the wrong man in cuffs for the wrong reason. And somewhere ahead, the truth was waiting. The patrol car rolled into the station garage and came to a stop. The engine cut. Silence rushed in, thick and uncomfortable. Palmer stepped out, first adjusted his belt, and opened the rear door. Out, he said. Daniel stood carefully, cuffs still tight behind his back. Two officers near the booking desk glanced over without much interest at first. Another routine arrest. Another face. That assumption lasted only seconds. Palmer guided Daniel inside. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell of paper disinfectant and stale air filled the room. A desk sergeant looked up already halfway through a form. "What do we have?" he asked. "Failure to comply with a lawful order," Palmer said. "Suspicious behavior near restricted area." The sergeant nodded automatically, then looked at Daniel more closely. His eyes lingered. "Not hostile. Curious," name the sergeant said. "Daniel Brooks." The sergeant typed, paused, looked up again. "Date of birth." Daniel answered, calm, clear. The keyboard clacked again, then stopped. The sergeant frowned at the screen. He leaned closer, reread what was there, then looked up slowly. His tone changed, subtle but unmistakable. "Sir, can you repeat your name?" "Daniel Brooks," Daniel said again. The sergeant's jaw tightened. He turned the monitor slightly, shielding it from Palmer's view, then stood up. "One moment." Palmer shifted his weight. "What's the issue?" The sergeant didn't answer. He walked briskly to a glass-walled office and knocked once before stepping inside. Voices murmured. A chair scraped back. A minute passed, then two. A lieutenant emerged, mid-40s, calm eyes. She looked at Daniel first, then at the cuffs, then at Palmer. "Why is the state public safety director in my booking area?" she asked quietly. The words landed heavy. Palmer blinked. "What?" The lieutenant turned her tablet toward him. "Daniel Brooks, appointed 3 years ago, reports directly to the governor during emergencies." That Daniel Brooks. Palmer stared at the screen. The photograph matched. Same face. Same calm eyes now looking back at him from across the room. "No," Palmer said automatically. "That can't be right." Daniel spoke, then his voice steady. "Officer, this is the moment you were warned about." The lieutenant stepped forward. "Take the cuffs off him, now." Palmer hesitated. "Just a fraction. Enough." "Badge," the lieutenant said. "And your radio." The cuffs came off. Daniel rubbed his wrists slowly, red marks blooming where the metal had pressed. He did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He simply met Palmer's eyes. The room felt smaller. Every officer nearby was watching now. Phones were out again, quieter this time, but still recording. The lieutenant exhaled. "Sir, on behalf of this department, I apologize. This should never have happened." Daniel nodded once. "We will discuss that formally." Palmer stood frozen. His mouth opened, then closed. The authority he had leaned on all afternoon had evaporated in seconds, replaced by something cold and final. Someone made a call, then another. Names traveled up the chain faster than Palmer could follow. Supervisor, captain, chief. Daniel adjusted his jacket, reclaiming the posture that had never really left him. "This is no longer a misunderstanding," he said. "This is a record." And that record had already begun to spread. The fallout began before Daniel Brooks even left the building. By the time he stepped out of the station, uncuffed and composed, the first video had already crossed 1 million views. The shaky footage from the plaza, the clear audio of Palmer's voice the moment the cuffs clicked. It was all there. Unedited. Unforgiving. Daniel did not give a statement that night. He went home, loosened his tie, and sat at his kitchen table with the lights off. He wrote notes by hand, times, names, exact phrases. He had learned long ago that memory fades, but ink does not. At 8:14 a.m. the next morning, his attorney filed a formal notice of intent to sue. Civil rights violations, unlawful detention, abuse of authority, failure to follow verification protocol. The filing was precise, unemotional, devastating. By noon, every major outlet had picked it up. State Public Safety Director wrongfully detained. Video shows officer ignored credentials. Hashtag Justice for Brooks trended by mid-afternoon. Comment sections filled with stories that sounded painfully similar. Different cities, same pattern. The governor's office released a statement before the end of the day, calling the incident deeply troubling, promising a full review. Behind closed doors, it was not calm. Phones rang without pause. Advisors spoke in low voices. Damage control had already failed. Internal Affairs placed Officer Palmer on administrative leave within hours. His badge and weapon were surrendered in silence. His union issued a cautious statement emphasizing due process. That phrase would not age well. Over the next 6 weeks, the investigation peeled back layers no one had wanted to examine too closely. Body camera footage showed Palmer never attempted verification. Dispatch logs confirmed no crime had been reported. Prior complaints resurfaced patterns undeniable when placed side by side. A public hearing was scheduled. Daniel testified for 40 minutes. He did not raise his voice once, He described the plaza, the order, the cuffs, the humiliation, not as an official but as a man who had done nothing wrong. Palmer testified after him. His answers were shorter, less certain. When asked why he ignored the credentials, he said he didn't feel threatened but felt challenged. The room went quiet. The decision came quickly. Termination for cause, loss of pension eligibility, mandatory decertification. Palmer did not look at the cameras when he left the building. He never worked in law enforcement again. The state settled 3 months later. $750,000. Policy reform mandates, mandatory verification procedures, expanded bias training tied to promotion eligibility, real consequences written into policy. Daniel donated the settlement to legal defense funds and community oversight programs. He declined interviews after one final statement. This was never about money. This was about stopping the next mistake before it happens. Justice in this case did not whisper. It arrived loudly, permanently. What happened to Daniel Brooks did not exist in a vacuum. It was the predictable outcome of legal misunderstandings, unchecked discretion, and deeply rooted cognitive bias intersecting at the wrong moment. From a legal standpoint, the violation was clear. Ordering an individual to leave a public space requires specific, articulable facts that a crime has occurred or is about to occur. Discomfort is not a crime. Presence is not a crime. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable seizures, and a command backed by threat of arrest qualifies as a seizure under established case law. Officer Palmer had no reasonable suspicion, no probable cause, and no legal authority to issue that order. Ignoring presented credentials without attempting verification compounded the violation. Procedure exists for a reason. Skipping it is not discretion. It is misconduct. But law alone does not explain why this keeps happening. Social psychology fills in the gap. Implicit bias operates below conscious awareness. It shortcuts judgment. It tells the brain who belongs and who does not before evidence is considered. Under stress, those shortcuts tighten. Training that focuses only on rules without confronting bias leaves officers technically informed but practically unprepared. Palmer did not act out of explicit hatred. He acted out of an unexamined assumption reinforced over time and never meaningfully challenged. This is why the presence of cameras mattered. Video removes ambiguity. It anchors truth. It protects civilians and officers alike, but only when behavior can withstand scrutiny. In this case, documentation transformed a private injustice into a public lesson. So what should viewers take from this? First, know your rights. You are not required to leave a public space without lawful cause. Calmly asking for the legal basis of an order is not obstruction. It is protected speech. Second, document everything. If safe record. Announce compliance verbally. State that you are not resisting. Evidence begins the moment an interaction turns coercive. Third, do not argue on the street beyond asserting rights. Compliance now does not mean surrender later. Courts exist for a reason. Fourth, demand verification. Credentials are meant to be checked, not dismissed. Refusal to verify is a red flag. For officers, the lesson is equally direct. Authority is not validated by volume or posture. It is validated by law. De-escalation is not weakness. It is professionalism. Questioning an officer is not defiance. It is democracy functioning as designed. And for institutions, reform cannot stop at statements. Data must be reviewed. Patterns must have consequences. Training must be tied to outcomes. Accountability must be real, or it is meaningless. Daniel Brooks did not seek this moment. He became it. Not because of who he is, but because of what happened to him. His case stands as proof that status does not shield against bias, but documentation and law can still force accountability. The final question is not whether justice was served here. It was. The real question is whether the next Daniel Brooks will need to endure the same path for the system to respond. That answer depends on what happens after the cameras turn off.